Thank you very much. Thank you, Chops. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Professor Blaxland. And of course, thank you to CASA. I think I'm going to be playing a bit of an outlier, and I also wanted to address this particular topic head on. Before we can do that, and without taking anything away from the comments of my illustrious predecessors, I want to ask a simple question of everybody. You know, what exactly do you mean by security? And if you're muddled about this, and if you're in a position where you've taken an IR stand, you're a realist, and then you have mildly disguised derision for other schools of international relations, then I think that we are going to end up with bias predisposing our argument. So obviously I'm a realist, but I'm also mindful of the benefits and the advantages of value-based liberal orders. And I'm also filled with great disquiet by the ascendance or the toppling of all other schools by any one given school, including that of the realists. So let me return to my question about what then is regional security. And could we and should we so happily, so in my mind, naively segregate military security from regional overall security? Does not one feed into the other? Where does military security actually fit? And I think that military security fits as an insurance and an assurance mechanism for the pursuit of the strategies that have been evolved by the region, by its players, by individuals, even by marginally crazies, for the pursuit of their, or the attainment of their geo-economic objectives. And that is where the militaries fit. And therefore structures involving militaries fit there, and ought not to, in my mind, ought not to be confused and placed at a level higher than they are. They are like diplomacy. They are an instrument of foreign policy. Diplomacy and the military are neither exclusive to one another, nor ought they to be. So I think that if we approach the problem from this perspective, we may end up with different answers. The first is, do you have, at least from the top of your head, each person has outlined the disadvantages and the advantages of AUKUS. Let me do the same. Let me rattle off maybe 10 to a dozen disadvantages and perhaps a marginally lesser number of advantages. So AUKUS, at the very top of our strategic value thinking, you know, since nation states tend to balance continuously between two contradictory predilections. One of them is national interest. The other is international trust. And these militate against one another. And very frequently, we end up at a given point in time, often pontificating about what ASEAN ought to or ought not to do, completely divorcing ourselves from the reality of what we ourselves may or may not have done at a point when it was necessary for us to confront or to follow the dictum that the only condition for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And we did very little. So I think it's very hard for me to subscribe to a view that actually moralizes to one other grouping without having to look at oneself. Therefore, what exactly are the, against that backdrop, let me say what exactly I feel are the disadvantages of AUKUS. The first of them is that it undermines the value and worth of a sovereign promise. The fact that France did the same thing to Germany, or that Australia has done what it has to France, it's neither here nor there. We're not into the fallacy of, you did it and therefore I can do it. So Q quacker, if I'm not wrong, is the actual fallacy, but that's not relevant. What is relevant is that you are seeking, this creation has sought to undermine the value, the worth, and the credibility of one sovereign promise to another. And it doesn't matter what the promise was and who won or who lost. When sovereign promises are violated on the basis of national interest, and that too military national interest, and that too dubious military national interest, then I think that we have something to think about. The second is that the AUKUS causes fractures and has caused a fracture in the companionship of democracies, if I might borrow a term or two from literature. The third is that it rebuffs the European Union without any real reason or without any real gain. And it diminishes the relevance of both the E3 groupings, that is the old E3 grouping involving the UK when it was a member of the EU, and France and Germany, and the new E3 UK where the UK is replaced by Italy. It diminishes the Quad by marginalizing and removing India and Japan from centrality. It offers Australia no tangible military benefit for at least a period of 2 decades. And that too, I think, is highly optimistic, because having been a long time admirer of the Australian industry and the Australian approach, I'm also a long time, a person who's for long been dismayed by the direction that Australia has often taken in this regard in terms of building its capacities and its capabilities. So I think that Australia is going to be ending up with no submarines whatsoever. It forces a binary. It forces a binary between China and the USA completely, once again, unnecessarily. It alienates France. Everybody has said that that's not a good thing, and I'd like to emphasize that. It weakens plurilateral structures that are already existing, such as the IONS and the WPNS and the ADMM plus, instead of strengthening them. It is just seductive in the fact that anytime you create a new thing, it looks like a great idea. And then you go over and then some other bozos who are now 11 and 12 years old will come onto these sorts of panels as we are, and then probably drag our thoughts over the coals and drag us over the coals, and quite justifiably, I might say. It seriously fractures the India-France-Australia trilateral. The ambassador has already made mention of it, but he also emphasized the fact that the India-Australia-Indonesia trilateral is buttressed. Yes, but as you say that one is a slow one, it ought to have been a fast one. And that's precisely my point, that for a long period of time, the Indian foreign policy is ignoring and lack of vigor in its dealing with Indonesia is now getting up and biting it in the Netherlands, in the nether regions. So it seriously fractures the India-France-Australia trilateral. It pushes Russia and China closer together, which need not have been done. The UK is by no stretch of imagination either is or is going to be any global power within the 30-year period that we're talking about between this and the submarine. And therefore, India's obsession with getting approval ratings from the UK is baffling to me. And finally, I'd say that as Professor Blaxland has already mentioned, it diminishes the importance of the Five Eyes grouping of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the UK, and the USA. What I mean by that is that any grouping that you already created is now pushed into the sidelines by this new boy. And we are now having to deal and talk about the new boy in relation to the whole region. What is the whole region represented by? I think it is represented by the Quad. So what are the advantages of the AUKUS? Well, of course, it sends a strong signal to China. Of course, it could be the embryo of a future military construct for the Indo-Pacific. I deeply disagree that either the Quad or the AUKUS is an alliance. Neither of them is an alliance. The whole concept of alliance is really antediluvian. It should have been left behind with the Cold War constructs that Professor John Blaxland says that we are no longer in. And yet we use the currency of those terms fairly loosely. It signals the USA's intent to remain invested in the region, which is a really good thing. It offers a very strong basis for the India-France bilateral relationship. And therefore, India-France bilateral relationship is being pushed forward. Is that good for India? Yes. Is it good for the Quad? I'm not so sure. Is it good for the region? Well, yes and no, insofar as bilateral relations are good or bad for any region. It offers legitimacy to the UK within the Indo-Pacific, and that's one of its big advantages, to the UK at least. Most important of all, it does free the Quad to concentrate upon those very points of somewhat derisive dismissal that I've been hearing, which is it enables the Quad to concentrate upon integrative regional projects. Let me try and explain this. The only way you will be able to handle China is not by confronting China militarily in either the South China Sea or elsewhere. The only way you'll be able to handle China is for you to knit this region, this Indo-Pacific region, in so tightly that there are no fissures or cracks through which China can make strategic entries. And that requires you to pay attention to the region as equals within the Quad construct. I'm limiting myself, obviously, to the Quad. So it frees the Quad to concentrate upon this integrative, these regional projects that integrate, and it allows India to leverage the Quad's economic potential to hit its own target of becoming a $5 trillion economy. So from India's perspective, is this all a good thing? Yes, it is a good thing. From the region's perspective, is it a good thing? Much less clear that it is a good thing. From the Quad's perspective, I think it is not a good thing at all. I stop there because I think that they're bound to be.
Admiral, I was just going to say those fireworks, definitely the Australian Prime Minister is going to be worried if you come on shore. I could see Professor Blackland and everybody wondering where this nuclear missile is going. But anyway, Admiral Chopra, I will leave it to you to take it with another question.
Well, for a moment, I thought it might be difficult to stop that flow, but Bilu, I think, did it himself, which is remarkable. But let me ask you one question in all seriousness, which is your comments on alliances. Now, you made a point that military alliances no longer exist in the traditional Cold War fashion or earlier, but I'd like to dispute that. There are two alliances, certainly in the Indo-Pacific, the one the US has with Japan, and the other that it has with the Republic of Korea, which it clearly lays down that the US will come to the military help of either of these two countries if they are attacked. Now that is an actual military alliance. And the AUKUS, while it doesn't have any articles about coming to each other's aid, is clearly lays down that it is a military pact, which is going to enhance building of submarines, lays down cyber, lays down AI, lays down quantum, it lays down everything else for a very specific military purpose. So it is clearly an alliance. So would you like to sort of expand on what you mean when you say that there are no longer any alliances in the world of today?
Yeah, I'm probably unable to make my point, was unable to make my point clearly enough, so thank you for the opportunity to rectify that. It is not my contention that there are no existing alliances. It is my contention that the age of entering into new alliances is now over. We are now replacing alliances all across the board by strategic partnerships. So we have a whole hierarchy of strategic partnerships. You have a strategic partnership, you have a comprehensive strategic partnership, you have a global comprehensive strategic partnership. And the fact is that these partnerships are not based upon military commitments of one or another, but on a the larger the number of policy fields, the more critical is the strategic partnership. And therefore, AUKUS, if you confine AUKUS to the area of military production of submarines and the enhancement of AI, etc., first of all, that itself is a bit of a stretch because AUKUS is correct for the requirement for production of submarines and the transfer of technology relating to that. But other factors of technology are well within the ambit of the Quad.